Welcome, my friends. Tonight, you and I will travel through a story that is more than just words. It's an experience. An experience that will take us back through the mists of time, to a world where danger and laughter dance together beneath smoky, thatched roofs. Before we begin this journey, I want you to do something for me. Tell me in the comments, where are you watching from right now, and what time is it for you? Are you listening from your cozy bedroom in New York while the city sleeps outside your window? Maybe you're in Tokyo, watching the first light of dawn creep across the skyline. Or perhaps you're somewhere in between. London, Berlin, Sydney. Wherever you are, you're part of this moment with me. And if you haven't subscribed yet, do it now, because this journey through the smoky, sticky, absolutely chaotic world of medieval taverns is going to be unforgettable. Now, settle in. Maybe dim the lights around you. Turn on a fan if you have one. Let that soft background hum create the perfect atmosphere. Pour yourself a drink, whatever you prefer. Tea, coffee, something stronger if that's your style. Tonight, we're not just observers of history, we're participants. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine this. You've just trudged through a muddy medieval street that smells like a cocktail of horse manure, wood smoke, and something that might charitably be called soup. Your boots, your only pair, are soaked through from the rain that seems to follow you wherever you go in this world without weather apps or umbrellas. You're tired, you're hungry, and you've narrowly avoided being flattened by a cart full of turnips not once, but twice today. You need a drink, desperately. But this isn't a world of glowing neon signs or Yelp reviews. There's no GPS to guide you to the nearest establishment. So how do you find a tavern in a medieval town? You use your ears. You follow the sound of life itself. Somewhere past the blacksmith's forge, where sparks dance like orange fireflies in the gathering dusk. Somewhere beyond the fishmonger who's still shouting about his fresh river eels that smell like they've seen better days, you hear it. A chorus of human existence. Laughter that sounds like it's escaping from people who know tomorrow might be their last day to laugh. Shouting that carries the weight of stories that need to be told. And threading through it all, someone singing, badly, enthusiastically, about a goose who may or may not have been magical. You round a corner, and there it is. A building that looks like it was built by someone who'd had perhaps one too many ales themselves. It leans slightly to the left, as if the architecture has been sampling the merchandise. Above the door hangs a wooden sign, weathered by years of rain and sun, painted with something that might be a barrel, or a bear, or maybe, if you squint and tilt your head just right, both. The front step is slick with spilled ale, a preview of what's to come. As you push open that heavy, iron-hinged door, it protests with a creak so long and dramatic it could qualify for entertainment in its own right. And then it hits you like a warm, damp, slightly intoxicated embrace, the smell. It's not just one smell. It's a symphony of aromas that tells the story of human civilization in the most honest way possible. There's ale, of course, warm, sour, and splashed liberally across every conceivable surface. Beneath that, the earthy scent of people who bathe when they remember to and work with their hands for a living. There's wet wool that's been worn through countless storms. The yeasty aroma of bread that might be fresh or might be from last Tuesday. And threading through it all, the mystery meat that's been cooking in the same pot since anyone can remember. You step inside and immediately you understand. You've entered more than a building. You've entered the beating heart of medieval life. This tavern isn't just a place to drink and eat. It's a news center, a stock exchange, a dating service, a courtroom, and a theater, all rolled into one magnificent, chaotic, slightly dangerous package. The ceiling is low enough that tall men duck, and drunk men regularly introduce their skulls to the wooden beams. The floor is dirt, not metaphorically, literally dirt, though someone has made a valiant attempt to class up the joint by spreading straw around. It hasn't worked, but the effort is appreciated. Tonight, we're going to explore every corner of this world. We're going to meet the people who called these taverns home, understand the rituals that kept them alive, and discover why these rowdy, smoky, absolutely unforgettable places were so much more than just somewhere to grab a drink. So grab that mug, find a seat that isn't too questionably stained, and let's dive into the wild, wonderful world of the Medieval Tavern. As that heavy tavern door swings shut behind you with a finality that suggests you're committed to this adventure whether you're ready or not, the darkness wraps around your senses like a damp wool blanket. It's warm, yes, but also uncomfortable and slightly suspicious. Exactly what you should expect from a medieval tavern. Your eyes need a moment to adjust, and while they do, your other senses are being absolutely overwhelmed. Candlelight flickers against walls that are stained with years, no, decades of soot from the hearth, creating shadows that dance and shift like living things. The hearth itself blazes in the far corner, serving triple duty as heating system, light source, and legitimate fire hazard. Smoke drifts lazily through the air, not quite escaping through a chimney that might, if you're being generous, be partially blocked by a deceased crow. But let's talk about that smell again, because it deserves its own moment of appreciation. A medieval tavern's aroma is less aromatic bouquet and more emotional trauma for your nasal passages. The base notes are ale, warm, sour, and applied to every surface with the dedication of a Jackson Pollock painting. Layered beneath that is sweat, and we're talking about years of it, accumulated from humans who consider bathing a seasonal activity at best. Add a hint of moldy bread, wet straw that's seen things it can't unsee, and a whisper of boiled onions, and you have a scent profile that no medieval perfumer was brave enough to bottle. The furniture tells its own story of survival against odds. Tables carved with generations of initials, crude drawings that would make a sailor blush, and knife scars that suggest not everyone here has been consistently friendly. These tables wobble with what can only be described as stubborn pride. They've survived this long, they seem to say, and they're not giving up now. The benches creak under the weight of muddy boots, thick cloaks that smell like wet sheep, and the questionable life decisions that brought their occupants here tonight. That floor, and I cannot stress this enough, is actual dirt. This isn't some rustic design choice made by an interior decorator with a fondness for the authentic medieval look. This is literal earth, packed down by countless boots, covered with straw that's meant to soak up spills, spit, and the occasional unconscious customer. You learn quickly to step carefully, because one wrong move and your foot disappears into something with a texture that's best left unexplored and definitely not described to your mother. The crowd is what makes this place truly alive. It's a living, breathing organism that operates by rules known only to itself. Loud laughter erupts from one corner where someone has just told a joke that's either brilliantly funny or so terrible it's circled back to hilarious. In another corner, two men are engaged in what appears to be a heated philosophical debate about the fair price of a pig, their voices rising with the passion of scholars discussing the nature of existence. A woman at the next table slams her mug down with enough force to send ale splashing across the wood, and nobody even flinches. This is just Tuesday night entertainment. The man seated across from you has been staring into his drink with the expression of someone who's either contemplating the mysteries of the universe or trying to remember how chairs work. It's honestly difficult to tell which is which. Someone nearby sneezes and half the room automatically leans away like a well-choreographed dance. Disease isn't just a concern here. It's a dinner guest nobody invited, but everyone has learned to accommodate. And yet, despite the overwhelming assault on every sense your modern sensibilities possess, there's something undeniably welcoming about this place. The tavern is alive in a way that feels almost primal. It's rough, raw, and completely unfiltered, the medieval equivalent of social media, but with more spitting and significantly better stories. This isn't just a building where people happen to drink. This is the nerve center of the community, the place where news travels faster than any messenger, where deals are struck with handshakes that mean more than contracts, where strangers become friends or enemies depending entirely on how the dice roll. You've found your seat now. It's a bit damp, probably cursed, and definitely has a story you don't want to know, but for night, it's yours. You're part of the tapestry now, another thread in the complex weaving of medieval life. The tavern has accepted you, and whether you know it or not, you've just joined one of history's most enduring traditions, the simple act of gathering together to share food, drink, stories, and the fundamental human experience of being alive among the living. The adventure is just beginning, and your mug is still empty. Let's fix that, shall we?
Now that you've found your bearings, or at least convinced yourself that the room isn't actively spinning, let's take a proper look at the geography of this medieval social ecosystem. And I use the term geography loosely because the layout of a tavern looks suspiciously like someone arranged the furniture during an earthquake and then decided that was probably good enough. There's no blueprint here, no carefully considered floor plan designed by someone who understands concepts like traffic flow or emergency exits. Instead, what you see is a sprawling, organic spillage of tables, benches, barrels, and the occasional wooden crate that someone is optimistically passing off as seating. Everything is either too close together or too far apart, depending entirely on your current state of sobriety and whether you're trying to eavesdrop on the conversation at the next table or avoid it entirely. The hearth, the beating heart of this whole operation, dominates one wall like a medieval entertainment center. It's not just a fire, it's the social gravitational center of the room. People crowd around it like moths with mugs, drawn by the promise of warmth and the opportunity to dry out whatever part of their clothing got soaked during their journey here. Those lucky enough to secure seats near the fire guard them jealously, like dragons protecting their hoards. Those without fire-adjacent seating console themselves with ale, which provides internal heating that's arguably more effective anyway. The bar, if you can dignify it with such a modern term, is typically nothing more than a thick wooden plank balanced across two barrels. It sags under the weight of jugs, mugs, and elbows belonging to patrons who've discovered that leaning is significantly easier than standing upright. Behind this makeshift counter stands the tavern keeper, the unchallenged ruler of this chaotic kingdom, simultaneously pouring drinks, shouting orders, and giving meaningful looks to that one customer who still hasn't paid for last Tuesday's ale. There's no menu here, naturally. Menus require literacy rates higher than can recognize my own name when it's carved into a wanted poster. Instead, you ask what's available and then brace yourself for an answer that usually boils down to ale or shut up and wait. A narrow staircase leads to the upper floors, and I use the term staircase liberally. It's more like a wooden ladder that's learned to lean at a socially acceptable angle. Each step is worn smooth by countless boots and probably older than some of the kingdoms you could name. If you look carefully, you might notice a boot hanging from one of the railing posts. Nobody's entirely sure if it's decorative, a warning, or just someone's idea of interior design. That's not to ask. Some taverns boast a back room, which might be used for storage, illegal gambling, or hosting meetings that definitely aren't happening according to anyone who might ask about them later. The smart money says it's all three, depending on the day of the week and who's asking. These rooms have a mysterious quality that suggests they've witnessed conversations that would make historians weep with excitement and authorities weep with frustration. The walls bear the patina of age and poor ventilation. Candle soot has painted them a color that might charitably be called atmospheric brown. The windows, when they exist, are typically covered with greasy cloth or animal hide that filters the outside world into something resembling the view through a beer bottle. This is probably for the best because nobody really wants to see clearly what's happening in the alley behind the tavern at this time of night. Every surface has been thoroughly seasoned by the elbows, boots, and spilled drinks of generations past. The wood has absorbed so much ale that it's probably mildly intoxicating just to touch it. There might be a chicken wandering around. There's always a chicken, somehow, and nobody questions its presence because medieval taverns operate by their own logic. And yet, somehow, despite the complete lack of organization or any recognizable system, it all works. Everyone knows where to go, how to sit, when to shout, and when to duck. Regulars navigate the space like old sailors reading familiar currents, while newcomers learn quickly or find themselves wearing someone else's dinner. It's not organized in any way modern people would recognize, but it's absolutely vibrantly alive. The chaos has its own rhythm, its own rules, its own strange sense of order. And at the center of it all, keeping the whole magnificent mess from collapsing into complete anarchy, stands our next character, the Tavern Keeper, the unchallenged monarch of this wooden kingdom.
Every kingdom needs a ruler, and in the realm of the medieval tavern, that crown belongs to the Tavern Keeper. Don't look for royal regalia or a throne. Their kingdom is built from wooden planks and barrel hoops. Their scepter is a ladle that's seen more action than a knight's sword, and their royal decree is usually something along the lines of pay up or get out. But make no mistake, this person runs the show with an authority that would make actual monarchs envious. If the Tavern Keeper is a man, he's typically built like a barrel that learned how to walk upright and developed strong opinions about customer service. Picture someone carved from cured meat and bad decisions, with arms thick enough to wrestle a pig into submission, and a disposition that suggests he's done exactly that on more than one occasion. His face bears the weathered lines of someone who's seen every possible variety of human foolishness and has developed philosophical patience about most of it. Emphasis on most. If the Tavern Keeper is a woman, and often it is, she possesses a different but equally formidable kind of power. She's sharper than a blacksmith's file and can silence a room full of drunk farmers with nothing more than a single look. This is someone who's perfected the art of the withering stare, who can shame grown men into behaving themselves without raising her voice, and who keeps mental tabs on every debt, every slight, and every customer's drinking limit with the precision of a royal accountant. Regardless of gender, the Tavern Keeper has achieved something remarkable. They've seen everything, every sob story, every boast, every lie told to justify another round. They've broken up fights between knights and peasants, mediated disputes over gambling debts, and cleaned blood out of straw before their morning meal. They greet regulars with the kind of nod that says, I know exactly what you're going to order and exactly how much trouble you're likely to cause tonight. Strangers receive the suspicious once-over that comes from years of learning to spot trouble before it starts wearing your furniture as weapons. Behind that bar, that sacred wooden plank balanced on barrels, they perform miracles of memory. No written records, no computerized systems, just an internal ledger that tracks who's paid, who owes, and who had 3 too many ales last week and shouldn't be served until they've demonstrated basic motor skills. Medieval literacy might be as rare as honest politicians, but tavern memory is absolutely terrifying in its accuracy. The Tavern Keeper sets the entire tone of the establishment. When they're in a good mood, the place hums with contentment. Drinks flow freely, jokes are met with genuine laughter, and even the usually grumpy regulars find themselves humming along to the bard's songs. But when the Tavern Keeper wakes up on the wrong side of their straw mattress, wise customers drink quickly and keep their commentary to themselves.
They're also the local information broker, whether they want to be or not. Who's fallen behind on their taxes? The tavern keeper knows. Who's been meeting secretly behind the mill? They've heard the whispers. Who rode into town last week claiming to be a merchant, but whose story doesn't quite add up? The tavern keeper has been watching, listening, and filing away details that might prove useful later. Need information? You'd better hope you're on good terms with the person behind that bar. Need protection? Your best bet is to stay within their line of sight. Need a favor? Well, that depends entirely on whether you broke a mug last month and whether you apologized properly. Many tavern keepers employ helpers, a son, daughter, spouse, or some unfortunate orphan they've semi-officially adopted who now spends their days carrying barrels that weigh twice what they do. These assistants scurry through the crowd like industrious mice, dodging elbows and drunken lurches while trying not to spill anything or get trampled by customers who've forgotten that other people exist. But the tavern keeper remains the central figure, the stable point around which all the chaos revolves. They're part chef, part server, part accountant, part babysitter, and part enforcement officer. When fights break out, they're the first to grab whatever's handy, usually that ladle, sometimes a club kept specifically for these occasions, and restore order through a combination of intimidation and percussive maintenance. They understand something that many people miss. The tavern may feel like chaos, but it's actually a very delicate ecosystem. Every regular has their preferred seat, their usual order, their established place in the social hierarchy. The tavern keeper maintains this balance not through rules posted on walls, but through an instinctive understanding of human nature and the judicious application of either hospitality or violence, depending on what the situation requires. In our modern world, we might call them a small business owner. In the medieval world, they were something much more important. They were the person who kept the community's heart beating, one mug of ale at a time.
So you finally settled onto your creaky bench, successfully dodged the elbows of your neighbors, and managed to avoid asking what that wet spot is that you're definitely not sitting in. Your throat is dry, your boots are damp, and it's time for the main event, ordering a drink. But temper your expectations, friend, because this isn't a world of craft cocktails or wine lists written in elegant script. This is medieval times, where your beverage choices are limited, lukewarm, and quite possibly life-threatening. Let's start with the house special, ale. This isn't the crisp, filtered, refrigerated beer you know from modern times. This is ale in its raw, honest, uncompromising form. Unfiltered, meaning you can practically chew it. Unpasteurized, because pasteurization won't be invented for another few centuries. And usually brewed in the back room where the dog sleeps, which explains some of the more interesting flavor notes. It arrives in your mug thick and cloudy, often accompanied by floaties that bob like tiny ships on a beige sea. Are those bits of grain? Yeast? A chunk of someone's mustache that fell in during the brewing process? The smart money is on don't ask. It's not cold, because ice is a luxury reserved for winter ponds and the occasional hailstorm. You don't question how long it's been sitting in the barrel, because some truths are better left unknown. You just drink and hope your stomach is feeling adventurous tonight. Next on the menu is mead, which sounds sophisticated and romantic until you actually taste it. Made from honey, it should be delicious, right? Well, that depends entirely on the skill of the brewer, the quality of the honey, and whether the bees who made it were having a good year. When it's good, mead is sweet, strong, and smooth. When it's bad, it tastes like liquid regret with undertones of bee venom and missed opportunities. Some tavern keepers make their own mead, which can be either a delightful surprise or a cautionary tale about overconfidence. Either way, it's usually served to nobles, wedding guests, or that one bard who insists on being paid in either gold coins or fermented honey wine. Then there's cider, made from apples that were either freshly picked from carefully tended orchards or scraped off the ground 3 weeks ago after the pigs got to them first. It's sharp,
tangy and served in cracked mugs that might double as soup bowls by morning. Cider is particularly popular in regions where apple trees grow like weeds and where the locals prefer something just alcoholic enough to help them forget the smell of the gentleman sitting at the next table. Wine? Technically available, but unless you're in Southern Europe or the local nobility has graced the tavern with their presence, what you're getting is likely watered down, soured, and served with a side of barely concealed mockery. Good wine is reserved for lords, bishops, and merchants who've just closed a deal involving 12 crates of salt. Everyone else gets whatever's been sitting in barrels for an indeterminate amount of time, developing character whether it wanted to or not. And then there's water. Oh, brave soul, are you actually considering ordering water? That's certainly a bold choice, considering that half the time medieval water contains more microscopic life forms than a biology textbook. Clean wells are rare, and boiling water requires fuel that most people would rather use for cooking or staying warm. That's why even children drink ale. It's not about getting a buzz at age 8. It's about avoiding dysentery before your 9th birthday. The measurement system here is refreshingly simple. Nobody's counting ounces or crafting cocktails with precise proportions. You drink from mugs made of wood, clay, or tin, depending on your social status and how recently you've paid your tab. Some of these vessels still contain remnants of last night's stew, which adds an element of surprise to every sip. You raise your mug, breathe through your mouth to minimize the olfactory experience, and take that first taste. It's warm, it's bitter, it has a texture that suggests it might be plotting something. And somehow, despite everything your modern sensibilities are telling you, it's exactly what you needed. Because in a medieval tavern, if it's wet and won't kill you immediately, it qualifies as a fine vintage. The alcohol serves multiple purposes beyond simple enjoyment. It's a social lubricant that turns strangers into temporary best friends. It's liquid courage for those planning to try their luck at dice or romance later in the evening. And most importantly, it's a delivery system for calories when your last meal was mostly barley and disappointment. So drink up, friend. The night is young, your mug is full, and your stomach is about to discover exactly why medieval people had such interesting perspectives on life and death.
You've successfully navigated the beverage situation, and your stomach has accepted its fate regarding the ale, which tastes like it was filtered through a wool sock, but is definitely better than the alternative of sobriety. Now, your stomach is sending increasingly urgent messages that it hasn't received solid food since sunrise, and that breakfast of questionable porridge feels like it happened in a different lifetime. Time to eat, my friend, but prepare yourself because medieval tavern cuisine makes modern mystery meat look like haute couture. There's no menu here, remember? No waiter approaches with a smile and a list of today's specials. No one asks about dietary restrictions, because the only restriction that matters is, will this kill me faster than starvation? You don't order food so much as you ask what survived the cooking process and hope for the best. The star of any medieval tavern kitchen is the pottage, a thick stew that's been cooking in the same pot since the beginning of recorded history, or at least since Monday, and it's now Thursday. This isn't a recipe so much as an ongoing experiment in culinary archaeology. Whatever grains were available, get thrown in. Whatever vegetables haven't rotted beyond recognition, join the party. Any protein that couldn't run away fast enough becomes part of the mix. New ingredients are added daily, but nothing is ever removed. It's less of a meal and more of a time capsule that you can eat with a spoon. The beauty of pottage is its unpredictability. One spoonful might contain recognizable chunks of turnip and barley. The next might deliver something that tastes like chicken but has the texture of leather that's been chewed by a cow. The third spoonful contains something unidentifiable that your taste buds classify as probably organic and your stomach accepts with resigned courage. If meat is involved, and congratulations if it is, you're probably looking at rabbit, pigeon, or that chicken who made the fatal mistake of wandering too close to the fire. If you're lucky, it's game meat from a recent hunt, fresh and flavorful. If you're less fortunate, it's been aged past the point of reasonable consumption and seasoned with enough salt and herbs to disguise what might charitably be called advanced ripeness.
Your eating utensils are refreshingly simple. Your bowl is made of wood or clay, seasoned with the flavors of everyone who's eaten from it before you. Your spoon is either your own, carried in your belt like a medieval Swiss Army knife, or your fingers, which serve as remarkably effective utensils when properly deployed. Most people carry their own knife because eating is a bring-your-own-cutlery affair. Don't expect napkins, just the sleeve of your tunic or a shared rag that's witnessed culinary adventures it will never forget. Bread makes an appearance at most meals, though the term bread requires some generous interpretation. It's tough, dark, and heavy enough to be used as building material in a pinch. If it's soft, it was baked today. If it's hard, it was baked sometime within living memory. Either way, it pairs excellently with cheese that smells like old boots and has developed enough personality to warrant its own name. Sometimes there's salted fish, which taste exactly like you'd expect something preserved in medieval conditions to taste. Sometimes there are pickled eggs, which represent humanity's early experiments with food preservation and optimism. Occasionally, if the tavern keeper is feeling ambitious or has access to unusual ingredients, you might encounter what they grandly call the special, which is just a fancy way of saying, we had too much of this lying around and need to get rid of it before it starts walking. Flavor is, shall we say, optional. Texture is an adventure that keeps every bite interesting. Spices are expensive and rare, so most seasoning comes from salt, hope, and whatever herbs the cook could gather without being eaten by wolves. And yet, here's the remarkable thing. Sitting in that flickering firelight, with the warmth of food in your hands and the sound of life buzzing around you, it doesn't taste bad. It tastes like survival, like community, like the simple, profound pleasure of having something hot in your stomach when the world outside is cold and uncertain. You're not here for fine dining or Instagram-worthy presentations. You're here to eat like a human being who understands that food is fuel, that sharing a meal creates bonds stronger than blood, and that complaining about the cooking is a luxury reserved for people who have other options. So eat up, friend. Enjoy every questionable bite, because tonight, in this smoky, chaotic, absolutely alive medieval tavern, you're not just consuming calories. You're participating in the most fundamental human ritual, breaking bread with strangers who might become friends, enemies, or at least entertaining stories to tell tomorrow.
Now that you've successfully navigated the food and drink situation, and your stomach has entered into negotiations with whatever you've just consumed, it's time to appreciate the real entertainment. Not the bard in the corner who's missing half his strings and most of his talent, but the people. The glorious, chaotic, utterly unpredictable human tapestry that turns every medieval tavern into theater, news center, and social experiment all rolled into one. To your left sits a red-faced farmer who's already deep into his fourth ale, and it's not even full dark outside. He's in the middle of retelling the same story about his cow giving birth sideways, a tale that's somehow become more dramatic with each telling. By his third ale, the cow was the size of a horse. By his fourth, it was practically mythical. He punctuates each sentence by slapping your shoulder like you're a lifelong friend, despite the fact that you met him roughly 10 minutes ago. This is the same man who probably spends most days talking to livestock and considers the tavern his primary source of human conversation. His enthusiasm is infectious, even if his breath could wilt flowers. At the far end of the room, shrouded in shadows that seem deeper than the candlelight should allow, sits a hooded stranger. He nurses his drink slowly, deliberately, like someone who's learned that patience is more valuable than gold. He could be a runaway monk, fleeing from vows that proved too heavy to bear. He might be a bandit, taking a night off from highway robbery. Or he could just be really, really bad at making eye contact with strangers. Either way, you're not making small talk with him unless you're particularly fond of mysterious disappearances and unsolved missing person cases. Near the hearth, where the fire paints everything in warm orange light, a soldier in battered armor regales a growing audience with tales of battle. His stories involve dragons, which is suspicious, they feature encounters with Frenchmen, which is more believable, and they include a talking sword, which pushes the narrative firmly back into the realm of fantasy. Everyone knows he's lying, no one cares. His tankard stays full, his audience keeps laughing, and honestly, what more can you ask from evening entertainment? There's a merchant,
loud, sweaty, and utterly convinced that everyone within shouting distance needs to hear about his grain prices. He pulls gold coins from his pouch with the casual confidence of someone who's either very wealthy or very stupid, possibly both. He's essentially walking around with a neon sign that says, "Rob me after midnight," but he seems blissfully unaware of this fact. His enthusiasm for commerce is matched only by his complete obliviousness to personal safety. A pair of locals have claimed a warped wooden table for their dice game, and they're engaged in what can only be described as competitive cheating. One of them clearly has loaded dice, the other knows it and doesn't care because he's got coins hidden up his sleeves. They play with the intense focus of chess masters, except instead of strategy, they're relying on creativity, luck, and the hope that the other person is slightly more drunk than they are. They're probably saving the actual fight for when the ale runs out, which gives the whole enterprise a delightful sense of anticipation. In the corner, our bard strums valiantly despite being equipped with an instrument that's seen better decades. His voice cracks on the high notes of what sounds like a love song, though it's entirely possible he's making it up as he goes along. The melody is questionable, the lyrics are improvised, and somehow this still qualifies as high-quality entertainment. He's wearing pants, and he's mostly in tune, which already puts him ahead of last night's performer, who apparently had strong opinions about clothing being optional. Women move through the crowd with the confidence of people who know exactly how dangerous they can be when properly motivated. Some are tavern staff, carrying trays and taking orders with the practiced efficiency of people who've learned to dodge both flying objects and unwanted advances. Others are working their own business arrangements, engaging in negotiations that involve flirtation, economics, and occasionally the implicit threat of violence. They're sharp-eyed, quick-witted, and absolutely not to be trifled with. They can charm you, outdrink you, or knock your teeth out, depending on how you approach the conversation. Children occasionally dart between the legs of adults like small, opportunistic pirates, swiping leftover bread crusts and dropped coins. No one stops them because it's just part of the ecosystem. In a world where childhood is short and survival requires creativity, a little light theft from drunk adults is practically considered job training. And then there's the man who's slumped under the table, completely unconscious, but somehow still holding his drink. Everyone steps over him like he's part of the furniture, which he essentially is for the evening. This isn't just a crowd of people who happen to end up in the same building. This is a living, breathing community complete with its own social dynamics, unspoken rules, and entertainment value that no royal court could match.
Forget lutes and ballads for a moment, because the real soundtrack of a medieval tavern isn't music. It's a symphony of pure, unfiltered human existence. Close your eyes and listen to the layered cacophony that transforms a simple wooden building into the heartbeat of medieval life. It begins with percussion, the rhythmic clink of mugs meeting wood. Some clang cheerfully in celebration, others slam down with the authority of someone making a point, and occasionally one shatters completely, which is inevitably met with cheers because apparently watching someone's drink explode is universally entertaining. The wooden tables provide a resonant drum beat as fists pound in emphasis, elbows lean for support, and the occasional head meets wood when someone underestimates their current level of coordination. Then comes the laughter. Big, booming, belly-deep laughter that sounds like it's escaping from people who understand that tomorrow might bring death, taxes, or worse, so tonight's joy needs to be loud enough to echo into eternity. A farmer chuckles at his own joke about hay prices. A knight giggles every time someone says the word pottage, though nobody's quite sure why. A monk wheezes uncontrollably whenever anyone mentions ducks, which happens more often than you'd expect in casual tavern conversation. The laughter layers and builds, creating waves of mirth that crash against the walls and roll back through the crowd. Voices compete for dominance like roosters in a coup, each speaker determined to be heard over the general chaos. There's arguing, passionate, gesticulating debates about everything from the proper price of a pig to whether that last dice roll was legitimate. There's storytelling, with narratives that grow more dramatic with each retelling, featuring increasingly impossible feats and progressively more mythical creatures. Someone shouting about taxes with the outraged passion of someone who's just discovered that money doesn't grow on trees. Another voice bellows complaints about neighbors, weather, or the general state of the world. The tavern keeper's voice rises above it all, a commanding presence that somehow penetrates the din. They're calling out orders, settling disputes, and occasionally telling someone to sit down before they fall down. Their voice carries the authority of someone who's seen everything at least twice and has developed strong opinions about human behavior in general. A barmaid's voice cuts through the noise like a knife, sharply reprimanding someone who's gotten too grabby with his hands or too generous with his assumptions. Her tone suggests that the next person who tests her patience might discover exactly why serving ale builds both character and upper body strength. And threading through it all, someone keeps repeating, "Another round," like a battle cry, a mantra, a prayer to the gods of fermentation and good times. In the corner, our perpetually optimistic bard plucks away at his half-tuned lute, missing strings and all. He plays the same 4 chords repeatedly, occasionally launching into verses about lost love that sound suspiciously like they're about his breakfast, or epic ballads about noblemen that might actually be about his horse. Sometimes he sings about someone actually present in the room, which either results in enthusiastic applause or the rapid clearing of nearby tables, depending on whether his subject finds the impromptu ballad flattering or libelous. Random sound effects punctuate the evening. Dogs bark from under tables where they've claimed residence, apparently deciding they live here now. A goat bleats from somewhere in the back. Why is there a goat? Nobody questions it because medieval taverns operate by their own logic, where livestock occasionally joins the party. Occasionally, by some miracle of acoustics or collective exhaustion, the room falls completely silent. These moments last exactly 3 seconds before someone breaks the spell, usually with a fart that could register on the Richter scale, and the symphony begins again, louder and more enthusiastic than before. This isn't background noise you ignore while having polite conversation. This is the tavern's heartbeat, its pulse, its very soul expressed in sound. It's raw, rowdy, and relentlessly alive. If you listen carefully, you start to hear the rhythm beneath the chaos, a kind of harmony born from the beautiful disorder of humans being completely, unself-consciously human.
Once the ale starts flowing and the pottage begins to settle comfortably in your stomach, the tavern undergoes a transformation. It's no longer just a place to eat and drink. It becomes a medieval casino, complete with all the excitement, desperation, and questionable decision-making that gambling has inspired throughout human history. Except here, there are no velvet ropes, no professional dealers, and absolutely no regulations beyond try not to stab anyone over a bad roll. Gambling is the evening sport, and everyone plays, regardless of social status, sobriety level, or basic mathematical ability. Weathered soldiers sit across from barefoot farm boys, sharing the same cracked wooden table and the same optimistic belief that tonight fortune will finally smile upon them. There's no house edge because there's no house, just fellow humans trying to separate each other from their hard-earned coins through a combination of luck, skill, and creative interpretation of the rules. Dice are the game of choice, carved from bone, wood, or whatever material was available when someone decided they needed to add more excitement to their evening. These aren't precision-manufactured gaming pieces. They're lumpy, irregular, and about as fair as medieval justice. They clatter across tabletops like rolling thunder, each toss followed by a mixture of cheers, groans, and accusations of witchcraft. Everyone knows the dice are probably loaded. Everyone uses them anyway, because hope springs eternal and ale makes optimists of us all. Then there are cards if you're fortunate enough to be in a more cosmopolitan establishment. These are thick, hand-painted pieces of art, worn to the edges by countless hands, and missing 1 or 2 cards because someone probably ate them during a particularly desperate winter. The rules shift based on who's explaining them and how much they've had to drink. Sometimes you're trying to achieve the highest total, other times you're matching symbols, and occasionally everyone just makes it up as they go along. It's like poker,
but with more creative interpretation and significantly more table slapping. The stakes range from practical to absurd. Money, when available, is the obvious choice. Mugs of ale serve as currency when copper coins are scarce. Someone always bets their boots, which seems foolish until you realize that walking home barefoot through medieval streets might actually be preferable to whatever's currently residing in those boots. Livestock gets wagered: goats, chickens, and the occasional pig that may or may not actually exist. One memorable fellow bet his wife's dowry. Another wagered his freedom for the night, essentially gambling his way into temporary slavery. Spoiler alert, he lost. The regulars are professionals in the art of friendly deception. They shuffle cards with the smooth confidence of people who've learned that manual dexterity is just another tool in the arsenal of making money from strangers. They roll dice slowly, dramatically, building suspense like performers on a stage. They smile too widely when they're bluffing and too little when they're winning, which is actually a sophisticated reverse psychology technique that works surprisingly well on drunk people. Cheating isn't just expected, it's practically required. Hidden dice make appearances, sliding from sleeves like magic tricks. Cards get marked with scratches, stains, and mysterious symbols that mean everything to the person who made them and nothing to anyone else. Players develop mysterious coughs that serve as signals, codes that would make spies proud and drunk people suspicious if they were sober enough to notice. Side games erupt spontaneously throughout the evening. Arm wrestling contests that determine not just winners, but also who gets to keep their dignity intact. Thumb wars fought with the intensity of international diplomacy. And the ever-popular who can drink the most without falling over, which is less a game and more a scientific experiment in human limitations. Winners earn applause, free drinks, and the right to brag until someone else inevitably challenges their record. Losers earn a place under the table and a headache that will serve as tomorrow's entertainment. The beauty of tavern gambling lies not in sophisticated strategy or mathematical probability, but in the pure, distilled essence of human optimism. Every roll of the dice carries the possibility of transformation, from poverty to prosperity, from nobody to someone worth knowing, from walking home empty-handed to walking home with someone else's goat. If you win big, tavern etiquette demands that you buy around for the house or risk getting jumped in the alley behind the building. If you lose spectacularly, the proper response is to smile graciously, pretend you meant to lose everything, and begin the slow, strategic retreat toward the door while maintaining the illusion that this was all part of a clever, long-term plan. But win or lose, the energy is infectious, because medieval tavern gambling isn't just about money. It's about stories, camaraderie, and the fundamental human need to believe that sometimes, just sometimes, luck might actually be on your side.
As the night deepens and the tavern fills with warmth, humidity, and the comfortable buzz of people who've decided that tomorrow's problems can wait until tomorrow, a different kind of magic takes the floor. This is storytelling time, medieval style, where truth is optional, entertainment is everything, and the line between fact and fiction dissolves like sugar and rain. Our bard clears his throat in the corner, gently plucking at his half-tuned lute with the confidence of someone who's learned that enthusiasm can compensate for missing strings. He's lost a few teeth since his last performance, occupational hazard of the entertainment industry, but he hasn't lost a single ounce of theatrical flair. With a dramatic flourish that would make Shakespeare proud, he launches into a ballad of heartbreak and heroism, something about a knight who fell desperately in love with a mermaid and tragically drowned while reciting poetry underwater. Nobody believes a word of it. Everyone listens anyway, because that's how storytelling works in a world where entertainment is rare and skepticism is a luxury people can't afford. Truth is negotiable. Engagement is essential. But the bard isn't the only storyteller tonight. Around the tables, other voices join the chorus. Not professional entertainers, but ordinary patrons with ale-fueled confidence and tales that absolutely must be told right now, loudly, to anyone within hearing range. These are the stories that built civilizations and toppled kingdoms, passed down through generations, and improved with each retelling. One man swears on his mother's grave that he once wrestled a bear and lived to drink about it. His story has evolved considerably since the first telling. The bear was initially quite small and possibly more interested in honey than combat. But with each retelling, it's grown larger, more ferocious, and apparently more ferocious than any bear that has ever actually existed. By now, it's achieved legendary status and can apparently speak 3 languages and perform simple mathematics.
Another patron insists he saw a witch turn a cow into a goat, which raises immediate questions about his sobriety level and his understanding of basic livestock identification. A third swears on his mother's grave that he's related to Charlemagne on his mother's cousin's twice-removed side, which is entirely possible, given that everyone in medieval Europe seems to be related to everyone else through a complex web of marriages, conquests, and creative genealogy. Every story begins with the phrase, "You won't believe this," and they're absolutely right. We don't believe them, but we want to hear them anyway. Because in a world without Netflix, books, or any form of entertainment beyond watching your neighbors argue about turnip prices, a good lie told with conviction is worth its weight in gold. Boasts transform into ballads, minor mishaps evolve into epic myths. Someone tells a joke so spectacularly bad that it circles all the way back around to being brilliant. Another patron recites what he claims is original poetry, but sounds suspiciously like something he memorized from a monk's manuscript after a few too many visits to the monastery. The audience responds with the brutal honesty that only drunk people can muster. Quality performances earn genuine applause, enthusiastic hooting, and the kind of appreciation that makes a storyteller's heart soar. Mediocre efforts receive polite clapping mixed with helpful suggestions for improvement. Truly terrible performances are met with flying bread crusts, good-natured heckling, and the occasional demand for their money back, despite the fact that no money changed hands in the first place. If you're extraordinarily fortunate, a professional scope or traveling minstrel might grace the tavern with their presence. These are the real deal, performers who make their living traveling from town to town, trading music for coins, meals, and occasionally a warm place to sleep that doesn't involve sharing space with livestock. Their songs are polished, their tales epic in scope, and their ability to work a crowd into a frenzy both impressive and slightly dangerous. But even these professionals understand the fundamental rule of tavern storytelling. Never let facts get in the way of a truly excellent narrative. Truth is negotiable. Entertainment is essential. Engagement is everything. In this smoke-filled room with the fire crackling cheerfully and mugs sloshing as people gesture enthusiastically, storytelling becomes more than just entertainment. It's tradition woven into the very fabric of community life. It's connection between strangers who might never meet again. It's the way friendships are forged, rivalries established, and lifelong drinking partnerships cemented over shared appreciation for a well-told lie. By the stroke of midnight, half the tavern will be reenacting the legendary tale of the one-legged knight who fought off 6 heavily armed highwaymen using nothing but a soup ladle and righteous indignation. Everyone laughs, cheers, and temporarily forgets that it's all completely fabricated, because in a medieval tavern, every accomplished liar is a legend, provided the story is entertaining enough. And as the night deepens and the ale continues flowing, something shifts in the atmosphere. There's a different energy now, a kind of boozy courage that makes everyone feel just a little bit more attractive, charming, and capable of romantic conquest than they actually are. Welcome to medieval flirting, where subtlety packed its bags and left town several ales ago. It starts innocently enough with what might charitably be called eye contact, though in reality it's more like one eye squinting hopefully through a mead-induced haze while the other tries to remember how focusing works. A gap-toothed farmer leans across his bench with all the smooth confidence of someone who's forgotten that personal hygiene is a thing and slurs, "My lady, your beauty burns brighter than the hearth fire itself." The object of his attention, a serving wench who's heard this line roughly 17 times tonight,
responds by hurling a bread crust at his forehead with the accuracy of someone who's had considerable practice with moving targets. The entire room erupts in appreciative cheers because nothing says entertainment than watching someone's romantic ambitions meet cold, hard reality in the form of day-old bread. Others attempt more sophisticated approaches. Gallant offers to refill mugs, clumsy compliments about how lovely someone looks in the flickering candlelight, and heroic volunteers to help carry bowls of stew so they won't spill during the treacherous journey from the kitchen to table. Spoiler alert, the stew still spills, usually on the person making the romantic gesture, which somehow makes the whole situation even more endearing in a pathetically charming way.
If you're a woman in the tavern, whether staff member, paying guest, or traveling merchant, you're probably accustomed to fending off a predictable nightly parade of would-be suitors. This typically includes at least 3 aspiring poets who've confused alcohol with artistic inspiration, 2 arm wrestlers convinced that displays of physical strength constitute sophisticated courtship, and inevitably 1 gentleman who attempts to demonstrate his worthiness by balancing a knife on his nose. Sometimes these displays of medieval machismo actually work, usually when the audience is sufficiently entertained by the performance to overlook the performer's obvious shortcomings. More often, they result in black eyes, empty purses, and stories that will be retold with increasing embellishment until they become tavern legend. For those patrons genuinely seeking companionship beyond mere flirtation, medieval taverns offer services that cater to a full range of human needs. Courtesans work the room with practiced professionalism, possessing an almost supernatural ability to identify who carries actual coin, who possesses genuine charm, and most importantly, who's likely to pass out before successfully navigating the stairs to the upper rooms. Their transactions are conducted with discretion, though the implications tend to be anything but subtle. And then there are the jealous lovers. Oh yes, nothing ignites a tavern brawl faster than romantic jealousy. A stolen glance, a wandering hand, or a married man discovering his life laughing just a bit too enthusiastically at the bard's ribald jokes about corrupt bishops can transform a peaceful evening into complete chaos in approximately 3 seconds. Tables get overturned with dramatic flourish, mugs become improvised weapons, benches suffer structural damage that they'll never quite recover from, and somewhere in the middle of all this magnificent chaos, genuine human connections actually manage to flourish. A shy baker's daughter finds herself sharing stew and conversation with a traveling stonemason who makes her laugh despite having hands that could crush stones, but somehow manage delicate gestures when he's nervous. 2 thoroughly intoxicated farmers discover they share a passionate mutual hatred of turnips, which apparently constitutes the foundation for lifelong friendship in agricultural communities. A monk accidentally finds himself flirting with a nun, leading to a theological discussion that's both deeply intellectual and utterly inappropriate. Love, or something close enough to pass for it in candlelight, survives and even thrives in the rowdiest corners of medieval society. Because romance in a tavern environment operates on simple principles: equal parts natural charm, pure chance, and the crucial ability to avoid falling face first into your bowl of pottage mid-conversation. But sometimes, despite everyone's best efforts at maintaining civilized behavior, things go spectacularly wrong. It was bound to happen eventually. Maybe someone spilled a drink on someone else's only clean tunic. Maybe accusations of dice-related cheating reached the point where honor demanded satisfaction. Maybe 2 patrons claimed the same bench and neither possessed the diplomatic skills to negotiate a peaceful resolution. Or maybe someone made an unfortunate comment about someone else's mother, livestock, or soup. In medieval tavern culture, it genuinely doesn't matter what sparked the conflict. The result is always the same. Suddenly, everything changes. The tavern, moments ago a cheerful blur of music and socializing, transforms instantly into a medieval thunderdome. A wooden stool takes flight like a drunken bird. A pewter tankard crashes to the floor with the finality of a judge's gavel. Someone bellows, "Hold my bread!" and launches himself over a bench with all the grace and strategic thinking of an intoxicated catapult. Nobody expresses surprise at this development. In fact, most patrons don't even pause in their drinking, because bar fights in medieval times aren't extraordinary occurrences. They're expected entertainment, practically a scheduled part of the evening's festivities. While it might sound terrifying to modern sensibilities, these brawls are typically more slapstick comedy than genuinely deadly violence. Participants swing wildly at targets that seem to possess an almost supernatural ability to not be where the fist expects them to be. They trip over their own feet, stumble into other people's dinners, and generally conduct themselves with the kind of physical coordination you'd expect from people who've been steadily consuming unfiltered ale for several hours. Hair gets pulled with passionate determination. Beards become primary targets for grabbing and tugging. Shirts tear with dramatic flair. Meanwhile, the tavern keeper roars commands like a battlefield general, wielding a soup ladle in one hand and a wooden club in the other, because maintaining order in a medieval drinking establishment requires both culinary skills and a willingness to engage in percussive diplomacy.
Occasionally, someone joins the fight with absolutely no understanding of what they're fighting about. They simply observe action occurring and leap enthusiastically into the fray with fists flying, operating on the medieval principle that any brawl worth having is worth joining, regardless of the underlying cause or which side you're supposed to be supporting. Other patrons transform into an impromptu entertainment audience, placing informal wagers on outcomes, cheering for their preferred combatants, or strategically sliding their mugs out of the splash zone while providing running commentary on fighting techniques and style points. Weapons are refreshingly rare in these encounters. Most tavern regulars possess enough wisdom to understand that drawing a blade transforms a casual brawl into a legendary incident, and nobody wants to be permanently banned from the only establishment in town that serves consistently hot food and reliably warm ale. Eventually, someone connects with the floor and decides that horizontal positioning suits their current needs perfectly. Another combatant stumbles into a wall and concludes that this constitutes an excellent place to sit and reevaluate their life choices. The fight burns out like a candle flame, suddenly, dramatically, and without ceremony. And here's the remarkable part. Once the violence concludes, it's genuinely finished. Fighters are separated by helpful bystanders, mugs are refilled by accommodating staff, someone invariably starts singing, and within 10 minutes, everyone is laughing together again, including the gentleman with the freshly bleeding nose who started the whole altercation. No grudges survive the morning. No lawyers get summoned. Just bruises that will fade, stories that will improve with each retelling, and possibly a new nickname like One-Eyed Arnold or Bench Breaker Bill that will follow someone for the rest of their natural life. Because in a medieval tavern, a properly conducted fight is simply another component of a well-rounded evening. Messy, ridiculous, oddly therapeutic, and weirdly effective at bonding people together through shared experience and mutual embarrassment. So, the brawl concludes. The bard has passed out mid-ballad, still clutching his broken-stringed lute like a lover, and your stomach has reached a comfortable detente with the mystery stew and slightly fermented cider. The time has arrived for sleep, or at least the medieval equivalent, which involves lowered expectations and a philosophical acceptance of discomfort. But don't anticipate feather beds and lavender-scented linens. This is a medieval tavern, not a luxury resort, and your sleeping arrangements will reflect medieval standards of comfort, privacy, and pest control. If the establishment offers lodging, it's typically located up a narrow staircase that appears to have been constructed during an earthquake and maintained through sheer stubbornness. You'll navigate past floors that slant at geometrically impossible angles and duck under ceiling beams positioned at skull-testing heights, apparently designed by someone who believed that tall people represented a threat to structural integrity. The rooms are small, cold, and absolutely, unequivocally, shared. Privacy is a modern concept that hasn't been invented yet. You'll sleep shoulder to shoulder with complete strangers, some of whom snore with the resonant power of church bells, while others conduct elaborate conversations with people who exist only in their dreams,
often in languages that may or may not be entirely human in origin. The beds, and we use that term with considerable generosity, are essentially straw-stuffed mattresses that are thin, lumpy, and inhabited by what medieval folks diplomatically referred to as companions. You lie down fully clothed, boots firmly on your feet, with your dagger positioned strategically under your pillow, not for romantic ambiance, but for basic defensive preparedness. Blankets are communal property, which means they're also shared repositories for every scent, stain, and mysterious substance their previous occupants brought to the sleeping experience. If someone consumed garlic earlier in the evening, and someone always consumed garlic, it becomes an intimate part of your dreams whether you want it to or not. If you're too economically disadvantaged or too intoxicated for an actual room, you sleep downstairs wherever horizontal space can be located. This might be on a bench that's seen better decades, under a table that provides dubious protection from foot traffic, or simply in a corner near the hearth, curled up next to a dog that may or may not be an official tavern resident, but has clearly established squatters' rights. You'll be stepped on by late-night wanderers, probably sneezed on by people whose immune systems are conducting their own private wars, and quite possibly used as a human footrest by individuals who've forgotten that other people aren't furniture. The tavern never achieves true quietude. Even after the final mug has been drained and the last fight has been medically addressed, there's always someone muttering incomprehensibly in their sleep, a log popping dramatically in the fireplace, or distant flatulence echoing through the rafters with surprising acoustic properties.
And yet somehow, against all reasonable expectations, you drift off into sleep. It's not comfortable. Comfort is a luxury reserved for people who own actual beds. It's certainly not clean. Cleanliness is a seasonal aspiration at best. But it's safe enough, in that particularly medieval definition of safety that means probably won't die tonight. The fire maintains a defensive perimeter against the worst of the cold. The tavern keeper keeps vigilant watch, with one eye strategically open and a wooden club within easy reach. And gradually, the noise transforms into its own peculiar form of lullaby, familiar, fundamentally human, and vibrantly alive. You'll wake with a neck that feels like it's been personally rearranged by a malevolent chiropractor, a mouth that tastes like something unfortunate happened there during the night, and at least one bruise whose origin story remains a complete mystery. But for several precious hours, you slept surrounded by travelers, rogues, farmers, and fools who are all seeking the same basic human needs: warmth, community, and temporary escape from a world that could be unforgiving. No kings shared your sleeping space. No profound silence marked the night, just snoring that could wake entire villages, straw that had seen better centuries, and the quiet hope that your boots would still be there come morning. Dawn arrives like an uninvited guest with poor timing, sliding pale light through cracks in the shutters and prodding your eyelids with the merciless persistence of someone who clearly doesn't understand the concept of sleeping in. The tavern has undergone its overnight transformation. Not quieter, exactly, but subdued in that particular way that suggests defeat by alcohol and poor life choices. You open one experimental eye and immediately discover that someone's boot is resting on your chest with the casual intimacy of longtime friends. Someone else is conducting a sleep conversation about sheep taxes that seems both passionate and economically detailed. The bard lies unconscious beneath the table, still clutching his lute like it's his only remaining connection to his musical dreams. A chicken, because there's always a chicken, hops across the floor with purposeful determination, pecking at yesterday's bread crusts like it's conducting an archaeological excavation. Nobody questions the chicken's presence or authority. Medieval taverns operate according to their own internal logic, where poultry occasionally joins the social ecosystem. The fire has surrendered to entropy, leaving the room cold and filled with smoke that suggests the chimney might be engaged in passive resistance.
early risers begin stirring with the enthusiasm of wounded warriors returning from battles fought entirely within their own skulls. One man sits up, surveys his surroundings with deep philosophical contemplation, then lies back down, having apparently concluded that today isn't worth the effort. The tavern keeper is already operational, because of course they are, creating percussion symphonies with mugs and cooking implements, sweeping straw into fresh configurations, and reheating something in a pot that smells simultaneously inviting and vaguely threatening. They survey the horizontal bodies scattered across their establishment, then bang a ladle against a pewter mug with the authority of someone announcing universal wake-up time. Up or out, that's your morning alarm clock, delivered with the subtle diplomacy of medieval hospitality. Breakfast isn't a buffet situation. If fortune smiles upon you, there is more pottage, now even thicker and more mysterious than the previous evening's version. Bread gets rewarmed through proximity to fire. Ale undergoes watering down that nobody has the energy to protest. Some patrons address their hygiene needs by dunking their entire heads in barrels of questionable rainwater outside and calling it progressive personal care. You inventory your possessions, 2 coins and a button that might have come from your tunic or someone else's. This exceeds expectations, frankly. Your boots remain present and accounted for, though one bears what appears to be a bite mark, suggesting it may have had adventures during your unconscious hours. Fresh faces begin filtering in, early risers, travelers maintaining ambitious schedules, workers who require liquid courage before confronting livestock, tax collectors, or worse, neighbors with strong opinions about property boundaries. The tavern initiates its slow resurrection, like a beast gradually remembering how to be alive. Someone begins retelling stories from the previous night, though they've already undergone significant editorial improvements. What was originally one fight has become 2 separate battles, and the bard's song apparently summons supernatural entities. Everyone nods with the solemn acceptance typically reserved for religious doctrine. The night delivered chaos. Morning brings grogginess and regret, and yet you find yourself smiling because somehow, against all odds and medieval hygiene standards, you survived another evening in humanity's great social experiment. By now, you've experienced everything: the sweat, the smoke, the mysteriously sticky ale coating every surface, the shouting, the flirting, the food of questionable origin, and quite possibly furniture being weaponized for entertainment purposes.
And through all of these experiences, one truth becomes crystalline. The medieval tavern wasn't simply a place to purchase alcoholic beverages. It was the beating heart of the community, the social nervous system that kept medieval society functioning. In a world without telephones, newspapers, or any form of social networking beyond face-to-face conversation, the tavern served as the primary information exchange. A merchant arriving from coastal regions could share rumors and news from foreign ports. A battle-weary soldier could describe military campaigns from the front lines. A traveling bard could perform songs that wove communities together, even when the lyrics underwent creative modification with each performance. This was where connection happened on the most fundamental human level. Farmers shared tables with skilled craftsmen. Religious pilgrims broke bread with individuals whose relationship with the law was complicated at best. Complete strangers evolved into temporary friends, or, at minimum, drinking companions before the evening's second round was served. Here, the rigid social hierarchies that dominated daylight hours became fluid and negotiable. Class distinctions blurred under the influence of shared ale and common humanity. Rumors were born, nurtured, and released into the world to grow and multiply. Political alliances formed through handshakes that carried more weight than written contracts.
Personal grudges were either buried in alcohol-fueled forgiveness or escalated into feuds that would span generations, depending entirely on how the dice happened to fall. The tavern also functioned as an unofficial courthouse, where disputes received resolution through community mediation rather than formal legal proceedings. It operated as both confessional and theater stage, where people could unburden their souls or perform their chosen identities for an audience of peers. You could arrive seeking employment and leave with a new trade. You could enter with a full purse and exit with empty pockets but entertaining stories. You could walk in alone and depart married, or arrive married and leave with grounds for annulment. The possibilities were as varied as human nature itself. But perhaps most importantly, the tavern provided something that couldn't be purchased at any market or obtained through prayer in any chapel: genuine relief from the relentless demands of medieval survival. For precious few hours, you could position yourself near a warm fire, listen to jokes that ranged from clever to catastrophically bad, sing songs that were memorably awful, and temporarily forget just how difficult the outside world could be. Even when the ale was barely warm, the beds were infested with creatures that had opinions about personal space, and the food contained more mysteries than a theological debate. The tavern delivered something invaluable: the sense of being vibrantly alive among fellow human beings. In an era when everything from disease to warfare to particularly harsh winters could end your story without warning, that represented no small gift to the human spirit. So when you entered a medieval tavern, you weren't simply purchasing refreshment. You were buying membership in a community, investing in stories that would outlive their tellers, and perhaps, if the floor wasn't too crowded with unconscious patrons, securing a place to sleep where the fire would continue burning through the night. Because long before coffee houses emerged as intellectual gathering places, before pubs became neighborhood institutions, before cafes offered spaces for leisurely contemplation, there existed the tavern. Loud, unsanitary, completely honest, and absolutely unforgettable. It was democracy in its purest, most chaotic form, a place where every voice could be heard, provided it was loud enough to rise above the general din. It was education without formal curriculum, where life lessons were learned through direct experience rather than academic instruction. It was entertainment that was participatory rather than passive, where audience members became performers and performers became friends. The medieval tavern represents something we've partially lost in our modern, sanitized, regulated world: the beautiful chaos of unfiltered human interaction. The messy, complicated, gloriously imperfect process of people figuring out how to live together, one shared meal and communal hangover at a time. These weren't sophisticated establishments with carefully curated atmospheres and market-tested experiences. They were raw, authentic spaces where humanity revealed itself in all its flawed, passionate, ridiculous glory, where stories were born, legends were embellished, hearts were won and broken, and the fundamental business of being human in community with other humans was conducted with ale-fueled enthusiasm and unapologetic honesty. And perhaps that's why, even centuries later, we're still drawn to these stories, because they remind us of what we've always been, beneath all our technology and sophistication: people who need warmth, connection, stories, and the occasional good fight to feel fully alive.
The medieval tavern was never about perfection. It was about authenticity, about the kind of genuine human connection that happens when people gather around fires and share stories, complaints, dreams, and drinks. It was about community in its most essential form: messy, loud,
sometimes violent, but always, always alive. These places taught us that civilization isn't built in palaces or cathedrals, though those have their importance. Civilization is built in the spaces where ordinary people gather to be ordinary together, where a farmer can share a bench with a knight, where a bard can make a living through song, where strangers can become friends over bowls of questionable stew. The tavern was a classroom where life's most important lessons were learned through experience rather than instruction. Lessons about generosity and greed, about courage and cowardice, about the fine line between bravery and stupidity, especially when dice are involved, about how laughter can heal wounds that medicine cannot touch, and how shared hardship creates bonds stronger than blood. It was a place where people learned to forgive each other's flaws, mostly because everyone had them, where social pretenses were stripped away like wet cloaks at the door, and what remained was simply human. Afraid, hopeful, hungry, tired, and fundamentally grateful for warmth and company in a world that offered neither generously. These taverns were the original melting pots, where different cultures, classes, and creeds mixed together, not through policy or philosophy, but through the simple shared need for food, drink, and fellowship. They were laboratories of human nature, where the full spectrum of our species' capabilities, from noble to ridiculous, was on display nightly. And they were sanctuaries, in the truest sense of the word. Places where the outside world's dangers and demands were held at bay, at least temporarily, by wooden walls, fellowship, and the ancient magic of gathered humanity. We may have traded those dirt floors and questionable hygiene for clean restaurants and comfortable bars, but something was lost in that exchange. Some essential rawness, some beautiful chaos that came from people being completely, unself-consciously themselves in the company of others doing the same. The Medieval Tavern reminds us that the best human experiences aren't always the most comfortable or refined. Sometimes they're loud, messy, unpredictable, and absolutely perfect in their imperfection. Sometimes the most memorable nights are the ones where everything goes slightly wrong, where plans dissolve into improvisation, where strangers become storytellers, and every table becomes a stage. Tonight, as you sit in whatever space you call home, perhaps you can close your eyes and imagine yourself in that smoky, chaotic, wonderfully alive medieval tavern. Feel the warmth of the fire on your face and the rough wood of the table under your arms. Hear the laughter and arguments and terrible singing that somehow becomes beautiful when shared with others. Taste the ale that's not quite cold and the stew that's not quite identifiable but is somehow exactly what you needed. Remember what it means to be part of something larger than yourself, something as old as humanity itself. The simple act of gathering together to share stories, break bread, and be alive in the company of fellow travelers on this strange, difficult, beautiful journey we call life. The Medieval Tavern may be gone, but its spirit lives on wherever people come together to share their stories, their struggles, and their hope for better days ahead. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the smoky, sticky, absolutely unforgettable world of the Medieval Tavern. If you enjoyed this exploration into history's most honest establishments, please subscribe and let me know in the comments what other historical adventures you'd like us to take together. Until next time, may your fires burn warm, your company be good, and your stories be worth telling. Good night.